Hey everybody, welcome back to the Print3D channel. Today we are exploring the 7 coolest new features and upgrades in Simplify3D version 4.0, so stick around. Hey everybody, welcome back, and thank you for joining me here on the Print3D channel. As I'm sure you guys are fully aware, Simplify3D version 4.0 dropped this week. And there are a few videos out there explaining some of the processes. But what I wanted to do is go over the 7 coolest new features and upgrades that I think are awesome in Simplify3D version 4.0. But before we talk about those 7 cool new features and upgrades, stick around to the end of the video. I've got a very special giveaway for you guys. So as I'm sure you guys are fully aware, there's a lot of new features in the new version of Simplify3D 4.0. And one of the main new features is the multiple process wizard, which I'm really excited about because I do a lot of vase prints, and I think this will really enhance my printing. So let's head over to Simplify3D and let's talk about the new multiple process wizard. Okay, so when you first launch Simplify3D version 4.0, you won't see any real change in the opening interface because most of the changes are underneath the hood. For instance, what we're going to talk about now, the multiple process wizard. And I really love this because it gives you the ability to add different processes within one model, including vase mode, anywhere you want vase mode. So let me show you how this is done. I have a basic process set up, and you have to have a process in your control panel to start with. So you have to have at least one. And I just have some basic settings in here. You can see some top layers, bottom layers. I also have a brim, or I'm sorry, a skirt at 10 millimeters from the object. I've got 15% infill. These are just some basic settings that I would normally run for any kind of model. So if I hit OK, and I come up underneath the Tools menu, and I come up to this Variable Settings Wizard, what I call the Multiple Process Wizard. And you come into here, now you're given this really cool interface. And you also have the ability to move around your object on the print bed, or the view window, and see where you are in this model. And what I like to do is go to the side view, and bring this over, and then zoom in and kind of scroll around until I can see kind of like a side view, and then I just tilt it forward so I can see where I am. So for this example, what we want to do is we want to create vase mode, but we want to do 5 perimeter mode here at the bottom for like 5 millimeters, and then we want to do 20 millimeters of about 2 perimeters, and then we want to start vase mode. So here's what you do. You've already got your process to split, which is your model. And then what you want to do is you can use the slider, or you can just dial it in. So we want to go to 5 millimeters, and we want to add a location by hitting this location button. So that adds the location into the list. The next one we want to do is going to be at 20 millimeters. So we'll go ahead and enter 20 there, and we want to add a location. Okay, so that gives us our 3 sets. We have our bottom piece, our middle piece, and our top piece, and this will split this model into 3 pieces. So we'll go ahead and hit split process, and as you can see there are 3 processes here in the processes list. So now we can come in here and we can dial in these settings, and obviously we won't want any top layers, and we want to do say 5 perimeters, or 4 bottom layers, I'm sorry, and 5 perimeters, and 0% infill. And we'll leave our little brim skirt on, but we'll change this to a brim by entering 0 in the skirt offset. Obviously we didn't have any infill. And we'll keep the speed down. We'll keep it around 40 millimeters. Oops, sorry, that's the wrong place. That's bridging. Under speeds, we'll drop this down to 40 millimeters per second. And that'll be our setting for our first model process. So in the second process, we'll double click on model 2, and we'll do the same thing. We'll take off our top layers. We'll take off our bottom solid layers. And we'll set our perimeters to 2, because that'll be where the transition goes from 5 to 2. And obviously we'll turn this off because it's not going to print it either way because it does ignore it. And we'll drop down our infill percentage because we don't want any infill. And then under speeds, we'll keep this down at 40 millimeters per second, and we'll hit OK. So for the next process, we want to turn this on to vase mode. So we'll double click, we'll go into layer, and we'll just turn on single outline corkscrew printing mode, which is vase mode. And then we'll go under speeds, and let's crank this up to 60 millimeters per second, and then let's just hit OK. So next thing you want to do is you want to process this. So we'll just go to prepare to print, and we'll select all, and we'll hit OK. And it's going to tell us that that spiral vase mode setting that we put in here in the top part of the model, it's going to turn off a bunch of settings. And we could have done that manually, but we'll go ahead and hit yes. And now it'll process this model with all 3 phases. And in this new interface of the sliced model, if you come over here to the coloring and go to current processes, you can see our 3 different processes well illustrated where they are. So we have we dial this back, we have our first 5 layers, or our first 5 millimeters are going to have 5 perimeters. It'll switch to 2 perimeters for 20 millimeters, and then it'll switch over to vase mode to finish the print. And that is very awesome. That is the strength right there of multiple processes, or what they call the variable settings wizard. I call it the multiple process wizard because it really does add multiple processes to your process list. And that's a very strong function. So as you can see in the video, setting up multiple processes using the wizard is a very convenient way to do things. But there are some caveats to this, and one is in particular that I want to note. It does turn off all your top layers when you use the multiple process wizard. And say you had a print that had an area in the center that you wanted to be, say, illuminated like a lamp, and you had 2 solid pieces on top and bottom, and you wanted to print the whole thing at once because you had a hole in the center to drop your lamp into. Well, you'd have to add in multiple processes to create those solid layers in between your regular printing layers. So maybe if enough of us ask Simplify3D, they can bring that feature back. But for now, I think the multiple process wizard is super, super handy, and I find it really cool that you can actually set up a multiple process print with vase mode inserted anywhere in it now. That's one of the coolest new features of the multiple processes. One of the other new cool features and upgrades in Simplify3D version 4.0 is the dynamic gap fill. Dynamic gap fill is very cool because if you have a bunch of small parts that have a little areas that have insets in them or thin perimeters because you have a hole near the perimeter, in the previous version of Simplify3D, some of those areas wouldn't get filled. The algorithm that slices your model would actually ignore those areas. Now with dynamic gap fill, Simplify3D goes back and fills all those areas as much as possible, and it's a very, very cool feature. So let's head over to Simplify3D and I'll show you how dynamic gap fill works. Okay, so here we are in Simplify3D version 4.0, and we have here a BLTouch bracket for the Tevo Tarantula. In an instance like this, where you can see that there's going to be a lot of thin walls, normally you would go into your process settings, and you would go into the advanced, and you would go to the thin wall behavior. And you can see here there's some new parameters, and some of the areas have been rearranged. It may take you a moment to find everything. But underneath the advanced is your thin wall behavior. And in the previous version of Simplify3D, which I'll show you here, the slicing behavior and the thin wall behavior were swapped, and under thin wall behavior you only had really these 2 options and this perimeter overlap, and that was still under the advanced section of Simplify3D version 3. So if we go back over to 4, you can see now you have some new options, and under internal thin wall wall type here, if you go to gap fill, allow gap fill, that will fill in all those little gaps. So let's turn this off first and I'll show you what it looks like sliced. So we'll just go to prepare to print, and I'm just using some basic settings. And if you take a good look here, you can see a lot of these areas here, especially along here, they won't fill in. None of those gaps are going to fill in. There's a lot of spots here. So if we go back in to the process settings under advanced, and we turn this on to allow gap fill, hit OK, and hit prepare to print, you'll see that now Simplify3D has added some more plastic into these smaller areas that the previous version was ignoring. And there's a lot of spots in here. And that includes some of the very first layers too. If I dial this back down to the first layer, you can see here these areas would normally have no fill in them whatsoever because Simplify3D's algorithm would just ignore them. And I guess it also depends on nozzle size, and I do have a 0.5 millimeter nozzle. But in my instance, this would not happen. This would be open here. And I can show you by going to the process settings again real quick, turning this back on to perimeters only, hitting OK, hitting prepare to print, and dial this down to the first layer, and you can see that it is missing plastic here. So that gap fill, those new gap fill options here under the advanced settings, those are very powerful. And you can also allow single wall extrusions or single extrusion walls for very thin walls. And I haven't played with this yet because I haven't really done any thin wall printing. Most of my parts have been what you've seen there and a lot of other models. But I haven't had to worry about my external thin walls as much. But having these 3 options available under the internal thin wall types, that is a very strong addition to the new version of Simplify3D version 4.0. And as you can see, the one here on the right shows all the gaps that were not filled, whereas the one on the left filled in all those gaps. And there's a lot of areas that Simplify3D did fill in a lot of gaps, and there's still some missing. So as you can see, Dynamic Gap Fill is a very powerful feature in the new version of Simplify3D 4.0. In fact, I think it's one of the more important features that they added because it really strengthens up your models and it fills in all those extra little holes. And it even affects your top and bottom layers. As I showed you guys in the close-ups, this model was printed with the Dynamic Gap Fill, and this model was printed without the Dynamic Gap Fill, and you can totally tell the difference. This is a very powerful feature, and it's definitely going to come in handy when we want to make really strong parts, or just to fill in all those little gaps that we used to see previously. The next very cool option and upgrade in Simplify3D version 4.0 is the new fill options. And this option gives you the ability to change the directions on your infill and your top and bottom layers independently. And that is really, really cool. This adds a new layer of finishing to your models too, because now you can direct which way you want your filament to lay down on your top layers to really clean up your models. Previously, you would get like the 90-degree angle fill top layers on all of your models. Now you can really dial it in and really customize the way your models look. So let's head over to Simplify3D 4.0 and I'll show you how to use some of those new fill options. And I'll show you a little demonstration of how it works too. Okay, so back over here in Simplify3D version 4.0, we're going to talk about the new fill options. And this is another very, very strong upgrade or even update to the way Simplify3D's algorithm handles top and internal fill layers. And it's super, super cool. So let me go into, basically what I have here is a GoPro mount. And if we go into my process settings here and we go into the infill area, now we are addressed with these two areas here. Now we have internal infill angle offsets and we have external infill angle offsets. And that's basically these are your internal layers and your external layers, your top and bottom layers. So what you can do is you can dial in how you want your model to look. So this can really improve the finish on your model. And as you can see, I have 4 top layers and 3 bottom layers. So in this instance, what we're going to see is a 45, 0, and 90 on the bottom layers, and then to finish the model, it'll go 45, 0, 90, 0. So if we hit OK here, and we hit Prepare to Print, you'll see the new options appear. And I think this is a very, very powerful tool. If we dial it back down here to the bottom, you can see that you can add into this longer infill or longer bottom layer to really add some more stability to the bottom of the model instead of always using that 90-degree angle on your very first layer. And of course I did use that 90-degree for illustration purposes only. But you can add other angles in and really define the way your model is printed. And then we go into the infill layers. Now you can see where I've really customized it. I have this one running at 0 degrees, this one at 90 degrees, and this one at 45 degrees, which is really going to strengthen up the model, and it does add a little bit more density to the model itself, which I think is very, very important. So if we dial this up to the top layer here, you can see that my very first top layer is going across on the Z or on the 0 axis. You can see if I zoom out here and I zoom back in, we're running across on the 0 axis. And I found that this actually makes a better cradle for the next layers that are coming up. So for the next layer, I went on to that 45-degree angle that we commonly see on our very first or our very top layer. And this actually really improves the finish again because this covers up all the problems that you may have had with sagging on that very first layer running at 0 degrees. So if we go to the next layer, this one is running again at 0 degrees. And if you remember in my settings, I had 0, 45, 0, and then 90. So to finish this off and really give it a really strong finish at the top and really cool, a very smooth look, we went with the 90-degree angle, which is running down the middle or down the y-axis there. And this will put down a really nice layer of filament and really give it a good finished look. And it'll also improve your models because a lot of times when you're running on that 45-degree angle, it's going to have to dodge around parts here. So in this instance, this actually worked out really good because it just kind of shimmied its way around all these and it put down a lot of plastic. So this is a very, very strong new feature upgrade within Simplify3D 4.0. So as you can see here in the little demonstration print, our second layer is going down here, and that's running along the 0 axis, running right down the middle of the print. And once that's done, it'll start doing all of its infill. And the infill pattern, as you can see is printing on the
It's printing on 90, 0, and then 45, which really adds a lot of strength and density to the model, like I said. And then once we're done there, it goes into that very top finishing layer. And you can really see that bead of filament laying down. It really does do a good job of finishing off the model and really making the model look much cleaner than having that 45-degree angle top fill.
So as you can see, the new fill options is a very, very powerful tool. Now the external fill and the internal fill are two separate independent controls. And you have a lot of control over them too as far as the direction you want to go. So if you really want to clean up your model and add a lot of strength to it without adding more perimeters, you can do different fill options. As you can see, this model was used with going 90 degrees across the top to really clean up the surface of the print. And in this one, we went along the 0 axis, and there's a little bit of gapping. It may need to be slowed down a little bit, so it does require a little bit of tuning. But you can see how this really cleans up the look of the model, and with the internal fill options, being able to control those independently, you can really dial in how you want your internal fill to be set down by your 3D printer. This is one of the very, very powerful features in the new version of Simplify3D 4.0, and I think this is worth the upgrade right there. Another new cool feature and upgrade in Simplify3D 4.0 is the new bridging options. Now I have a G-Max 1.5 XT Plus, and we're known for having awesome bridging. But some of the new features in Simplify3D allow you to customize the way your bridging is handled. One of the more important things is now that perimeters can be treated as a bridge between two areas of a model, and that is super important. Previously, it would treat it as a perimeter when it crossed two areas of the model that was actually supposed to be a bridge. And being able to set your perimeters as a bridge is very important. So let's head over to Simplify3D and I'll show you how to set up the new bridging parameters.
Okay, so here we are back in Simplify3D version 4.0, and I've dropped down a simple bridging model test that a lot of people use. This is a very popular one, and this was actually part of a set of models, and I just did a separated connected surfaces, which is still available, and I just pulled out one of the ones I liked. So normally when you would hit prepare to print on a basic print for one of these kind of models for a bridge test without dialing in any of your settings, you would be addressed with this. The perimeters are being treated as perimeters, and if you look here, external perimeter extrusion, that is the darkest of the blue, and then we have inner perimeter, which is the lightest of the blue, and then we have this outer perimeter. So we have all these different perimeters being put down. But we also have here is a bridge setup, because this is essentially being bridged. So these settings here for the bridge, which are in yellow, are different from what the perimeter settings are. So a lot of times that's where your sag will come into play, is on these perimeter areas. So if we exit out of here and we go back into our process settings and go under Other, now we can add in Apply Bridge Setting to Perimeters. So what this will do is it'll look at an area that requires bridging, and it even says here, if this option is enabled, bridging settings will be applied to any perimeter sections that cross a bridging region. So if there's already bridging going on, it's going to detect those perimeters, it's going to use it. Something also that's very new in the bridging section here is use fixed bridging fill angle, which is very cool. So now you can change the angle at which you bridge on your infill. So once it does all its bridging and it comes back for its next layer to lay down a solid layer, it's going to apply those settings here. So you can actually come in here and we'll put it here at 90 degrees, and I'll just show you for illustration purposes only. So we have our two new settings. We'll hit OK and we'll hit Prepare to Print. And if we dial back down to that area there, so we'll just come up to this nice and slow so you can see it happening. And once we get up to the area where it starts to bridge, you can see right off the bat, everything is being treated as a bridge, and you can see the new 90-degree angle for which you can infill. So now we can go back to our bridge settings and go under Other, and we can turn that off for traditional bridging so you can see what a traditional bridge would look like with these new settings. And of course we just dial back down here in the slider, and I'll show you that it is now being treated completely as a bridge. And that is very, very cool. That is actually a needed function more than it is an upgrade or a feature, because now your bridges will be much more consistent because the settings across all layers of plastic will be there. So like I said, you can actually come in here and dial in that infill, the lines that are going across for the infill part of the bridging, by just coming in here and using a fixed bridging infill angle. That way, no matter how your part is positioned, wherever the bridges happen, it will use that angle. So you have to really be careful with this. If you have a part that's on an angle, it'll try and use that angle to try and bridge, and it may actually make it worse. So you may want to turn that off for different things. But for a basic bridging test or bridges that are normal, using the fixed bridging infill angle could come in handy. So I think this is a very, very powerful new addition to the bridge test. And as you can see here in the demonstration video, the G-Max, which is famous for bridging, had no problem crossing over this little spans here. And you can see once it goes past the perimeter area and starts doing the internal part of the bridging, the speed does not change. So you can see right there in the video that both the perimeters and the regular bridging aspects are all moving at the exact same speed.
So as you can see, the new bridging parameters are super powerful. This is going to add a lot more stability when you do long bridges or even short bridges or areas around, like, say, screw holes or bolt holes where you have to do a little bit of bridging and the perimeter would normally droop or sag or have some problems. With these new bridging options, that's no longer an issue. When you're doing a bridge and Simplify3D detects that, you can also make sure that your perimeter is treated as a bridge. Now again, I have a G-Max 1.5 XT Plus and we're known for our bridging capabilities, but I did run out two models in two of the different ways. And this is the new version of bridging, and this is the old version of bridging. It's where it really counts, though, is on the bottom. So on the new one, you can see that there is a little bit of sag and there is still a little bit of problem. And this is running a standard bridge test. And it's very much comparable to the old way. But again, having your perimeters be treated as bridge is super important, and it's one of the very cool new features of Simplify3D version 4.0. Moving on to one of the other cool new features and upgrades in Simplify3D 4.0 is Smart Rafts. Now, I normally don't print with rafts. I've never really had a problem with bed adhesion, so I really don't print with rafts. But from what I can tell in the upgrades, they've improved them 100-fold, so it's definitely something you should check out. So let's head over to Simplify3D and I'll show you the new version of rafts.
Okay, so here we are again in Simplify3D version 4.0, and we're going to talk about the raft updates. And again, I don't use rafts, but I'm very curious about them now that they've done such a significant update, and they're calling them the Smart Raft feature. So if we look at this model and we slice it with the basic settings, we can see that there's some new features here, which are the base layers. Now, I know in the original raft functions, you had the ability to just disable the base layer. Now you can actually dial in. So if we exit out of here and go into our process settings and under additions, here is the used raft function that is normally seen in this area under additions. But now you can see you have the ability to dial in all of these settings. And if I tab quickly over to Simplify3D version 3.x, you can see how the raft functions have changed. So let me tab over to Simplify3D version 3. And you can see you have that ability to disable the raft base layers, but if you turn this off, you can't dial in what those are. And you're also given this raft infill, which is how much infill you're going to use, separation distance, raft offset from part, and raft layers. Now in the new version, you're given the ability to do an above raft speed, which is your first layer going down above the raft, your top infill amount, your separation distance, you can dial it in just like previously along with the offset, but now you have the ability to actually add in how many base layers you want on your raft, along with the original raft top layers. So this is a very strong feature. And if we slice the model here in the new version and we dial it back down and we go over to Simplify3D version 3 and we hit OK, we'll just leave all the base settings. Let's just turn off disable raft base layers and see what it does. Because like I said, I don't use rafts. So if we hit prepare to print, look at the significant difference in wasted plastic that'll go down in the original version. And there's also some areas in here that were being ignored in the new version because they're smart rafts. There's no need for any material to go down here. So if I tab back over to version 4, you can see this internal area has been ignored because obviously there's nothing printing there. So these really are smart rafts. It really does a better job of putting down a raft. And it also doesn't waste any plastic. It gets real snug up against the model here. So this is a very, very strong feature. And as you can see here in the demonstration video, as it's printing out that very first layer, it really does a good job and puts down a really strong first base layer of plastic to really build your model up on. And I really like the fact that it really hugs along the model here instead of wasting all that plastic before where it went out at least 2 or 3 millimeters away from the model.
So as you can see, the new rafts feature in Simplify3D has been really upgraded. There are a lot of good ways you can customize the way your rafts are printed. Now again, I don't use any rafts at any time. I've never had a problem with bed adhesion, When I have a small part, I just figure out a way to print it properly without having to deal with rafts. And I did print one of the carabiners just like to show you a demonstration of how the Smart Rafts work. And I haven't peeled off the back part yet. It's still on there. And I'm really curious to see how rafts work because, like I said, I've never really used them before. So let's see how this peels off and let's see if it's as good as they say it is. Like I said, I don't use rafts, so I don't know what to expect underneath all this material underneath here. And supposedly you should be able to just break it away. Now I've had this sitting for a couple of days, I have to be honest. And I am having some trouble getting the raft off, so it's not peeling away as easy as I thought it would. But I think if I used some tools instead of just my fingers to pull the rafts off, this might be kind of easier. But what I have pulled off, I can see underneath. And again, this is why I don't use rafts, because I think that it really ruins the finish on your very first layer of your model, so I don't normally use them. But the new customizable controls in Simplify3D 4.0 for people who do use the raft, I think this is a great enhancement, and I think you might find this very helpful when you're creating your rafts, when you're 3D printing models that are very difficult. Another new cool feature and upgrade in Simplify3D 4.0 is the way support has been upgraded. And there are a lot of new enhancements in here. So let's head over to Simplify3D 4.0 and I'll show you all the new support enhancements.
Okay, so we're back over here in Simplify3D version 4.0, and we're going to talk about some of these really great new support feature enhancements. And these are very, very strong. This is a very welcome addition to the way support is treated when you're using support features within a model. So as you can see here, I've got a small part here from the Tron Lightcycle, and I printed this without support on my Gmax before, but I wanted to show you guys what it looked like with some of these new support features. So I just went ahead and went into the support generation window and just generated some automatic support just to show you guys how these new features work. So if we go into our process settings and we go underneath support, this is where all the new settings appear. So now what we have is we have something called support base layers. And these are the layers that go on underneath the support, and they're actually solid layers, which is very, very cool. This is a very strong addition to the way support is featured within Simplify3D version 4, because if you're using very small pillars, very 1, 2, 3, or even up to 10 millimeter support pillars, having a smaller base layer that actually sticks to the bed instead of having the small lines that are used for support is actually a very good upgrade, and it's a very well needed upgrade. So that's one of the very strong features in here. The other thing you have the ability to do is you have these support infill angles, which have always been there, but you have the separation from part, which has been updated to include upper vertical separation layers and lower vertical separation layers. And then you have all of your dense support features, which is a brand new feature in here, and it's been separated out of the support materials as a separate function. And this is a very handy feature if you have dual extruders. And the idea behind this is, and I don't have dual extruders, but I can explain this to you because it's really cool. The idea behind this is that in your other extruder for your dense support areas, this would spit out a different kind of filament. For instance, if you're using water soluble or even some of the easily broken breakaway support material in your other extruder for your support, so instead of using that, which is a little bit more expensive, you can use standard PLA up until it reaches your dense support layers, and then it'll switch over to this other material, and that'll save a lot of time and actually a lot of money, because you know that support material is a lot more expensive than regular PLA in most instances. So this is a huge upgrade. There's a lot of new features in here that have been polished, and things have been separated and put into their own functions so they're not combined with other functions. So I think this is a very strong addition to the way support is handled in Simplify3D. One of the other new things, and it doesn't actually say it in here, but the brim has been added to support. So if you enact support material, you will also get a brim if you are using a brim with your support material. Obviously, if you're using a skirt, it'll just offset as normal. But if you do 0 in the skirt offset to create the brim, when it puts down the support material around the base of the support material, as you can see in the demonstration video here, it actually puts down a brim, which is awesome. And as you can also see here, it's also printing out some of those really great support base layers, which are really going to hold the model up on a really strong footprint on your print bed, no matter if you're using BLTouch, acrylic glass, or any kind of other build surface. This adds a little bit more stability to it. So all those new support features are very, very strong here in Simplify3D version 4.0. I think, especially if you're using dual extruders, This is a great way to save a little bit of money and a little bit of time, and it'll also make it a lot easier to disable the support material from the model so you won't have those layers that are kind of stuck to it, especially with dissolvable support.
As you can see, the new support enhancements are a very powerful upgrade in the new version of Simplify3D 4.0, especially if you're running dual extruders. Now, I don't have a dual extruder machine, but some of the enhancements that they've added to support features I find very attractive. And the first one is being able to add a brim to the support material, and that is awesome. Normally it would skip that layer where the support material was, especially if the support material is crossing over your brim or your skirt, and then it would print it on top of that, creating all kinds of chaos. Now it separates it out and puts a brim right on the support material. And the other cool new feature is that you can put on those bottom layers that really help the support material stick to the bottom. Now this is that zigzag pattern, and I normally don't run this. I run 0, 90, 45, and I create a very cool cradle with my support material for all my prints. But having a couple of bottom layers, solid bottom layers underneath the support material is going to really help that support material stick down, especially in very, very small areas. So that is a very cool enhancement right there. And also being able to do the support material and then add like a PVA or dissolvable support between the model and not waste the very expensive dissolvable materials, that is a very strong feature in the new support features in Simplify3D version 4.0. And lastly, the really cool new feature and upgrade in Simplify3D 4.0 is your sliced model interface. They've added some new features in here that allow you to see the multiple processes. There's a lot more color coding, and the new interface allows you to move through the layers using your arrow keys on your keyboard instead of having to go up and grab your mouse all the time. And that's super cool. That's a very strong, even though it seems very minuscule, it's a very strong enhancement. I really like it.
Okay, so here we are back in Simplify3D version 4.0, and the last thing I want to talk about here is the interface once you've sliced a model. And this is very, very important because they've really divided up the way the interface works as far as color coding goes. So if I go ahead and hit prepare to print on this model, and I've got a couple of processes set up in this model, and then we wait for it to finish slicing, and this should take a few seconds. You can see that they've added some new features as far as the way color coding has been done as far as what part of the model is being printed. So right off the bat, and I'll move this out of the way so you guys can see this, if we dial this back down and we get into some of the other parts of the model, you can see that they now have what's called outer perimeter, inner perimeter, external single extrusion, internal single extrusion, and gap fill. And those are new. And the way the dense support has been colored out is that's a new feature too. Now as far as the coloring goes, which is very cool, this is a new feature too. You can look at your multiple processes that you're using within the model by going to current process. And this will show you the different processes that you have set up in your model. And for in this instance, what I've done is on the bottom I'm using 20% infill, and once the base is finished printing, we're going down to 10% infill to save a little time and plastic. Because I think it doesn't really need any other infill higher than 10%. I could probably even go down to 5. But that's a new feature here. It really shows the different colors within the process setting. And you can also dial in here through some of the other settings here. You have your movement speeds, which has been updated a little bit, and your active tool head setting, which has always been just if you have two tool heads, multiple extruders, you'll see the different colors. And that'll come in handy when you're doing the dissolvable support material in your dense support layers, so you can see where that's actually laying down between the PLA or the other substrates that are using. Also under feature type, again, like I said, they've updated this to look a little bit more cleaner and to include some of the new features that have been added underneath the hood. And lastly, of course, was again the current process. And you can also turn on all your different setups as far as like the travel moves and where the retraction settings are. And you can see where you're most likely going to have stringing too with these retraction settings in these movement areas here with these red lines. So this is very cool new update to the way the user interface is. Another cool feature is the ability to move through the interface once you have it selected using the up and down arrows on your keyboard. So I'm just hitting my up and down arrow on my keyboard and I'm able to cycle through the layers. So that's a new feature. Also, the tool head position I think is a new added addition to the user interface once your model has been sliced, because this gives you the opportunity to see where the tool head is if you're looking for a mistake in the print. So these new updates into the user interface of the sliced model are some significant additions, and I think they're welcome additions too, because the current process especially, because when you're doing multiple processes, it's very handy to see where your multiple processes are in the slice without having to slide through or dial through the model to look visually where they are. So now it's been color coded. And of course, if you have 30 or 40 processes, they'll all show up here in multiple different colors. So this is a very cool update to the way the sliced model looks in the user interface here in Simplify3D version 4.0.
So those are what I think are the 7 coolest new features and upgrades in the new version of Simplify3D 4.0. To summarize, my final thoughts are these. I think this is a significant upgrade. A lot of the new features are things in the process settings and where they're the most important. Mainly in your support material, those new Gapfill options, the new fill option directions, having them independent from the internal fill and the external fill, that is super, super powerful. The idea that you can do multiple processes using the wizard. Now the wizard does need a little bit of work, but I think with a little bit of help from us, the community, we can help polish that into a very, very powerful tool. And of course, those new bridging options are very, very handy, especially if you have a printer that's having issues with bridging. Having a little bit better way to dial in your bridging aspects of your model is a very, very powerful upgrade to Simplify3D, and I think that one's very important too. And again, I really don't use the raft function at all, but what I've seen in the upgrade and the comparison between the older version and the new version, it looks like they've really done a good job of dialing in how you can set up your rafts. So if you do use rafts, I'm sure you're going to find this a very powerful feature. And finally, those support feature options, those are probably what I would say are the selling point of the new version of Simplify3D. Being able to conserve some of your more expensive support material, especially the dissolvable support, and being able to customize how you put your support material in, using that new base layer function so the support material has a better way to adhere to the bed, applying the brim to the support material, that is a super strong feature. So all in all, I would say the support enhancements alone sell the new upgrade. So in my humble opinion, and of course this is my humble opinion, and I use Simplify3D every single day, I think version 4.0 is a significant upgrade and is definitely worth every penny. All these new features that we've talked about today are definitely worth upgrading if you haven't already. Now, if you're having some issues setting up Simplify3D, they're very active on their forum on Facebook and on their own website. So if you have questions, definitely reach out to the community or reach out to Simplify3D and they'll definitely answer your questions. I've never had a problem with their customer service. They have been spot on in getting back to me on any issues or questions I have. And I've been beta testing the new version of Simplify3D for the past couple of weeks. And any issues I had, I came up with, I sent them information about it, and they got back to me right away about those issues. So if you're having issues with the new version of Simplify3D 4.0, definitely contact support. But to summarize, I really love the new version of Simplify3D 4.0. I think all the enhancements they've included, all the upgrades, all the little nuances, including the new user interface once you've sliced the model. Now I know it's not that much different from the previous, but what they've added is dollar value. And I think it's worth every penny. So definitely go out and buy or upgrade if you've already purchased Simplify3D, the new version, and enjoy all these cool new features. And finally, before we wrap up today, we have a very special announcement. Simplify3D was very gracious enough to give us a copy of Simplify3D 4.0 to give away to one of my lucky subscribers. And that is very awesome. And this is an international contest. It is open to anyone in the world. Down in the description, there'll be a link to the Gleam page, and the contest will run for 7 days, and then we'll pick a winner, and you will get a brand new copy of Simplify3D version 4.0. If you already own a copy of Simplify3D version 4.0 or the previous version, this would be a really great way to add it to multiple computers if you have multiple printers that are tethered or you use multiple computers. So this is a contest for everybody. It's not just for people who don't own Simplify3D. This is a great way to get some additional licenses. And like I said, this is open internationally to anyone in the world. So definitely check out the Gleam information below. There'll be a couple of ways to enter to win your very own copy of Simplify3D version 4.0. And I can't thank Simplify3D enough. I really want to thank them for providing a beta copy of the new version of Simplify3D for me to check out and run it through its paces. I did give them additional feedback. They fixed a few things. I don't know if it was from anything I said, but they had some issues with the beta versions and they've come up with a couple. Now we have the Grandmaster, and that's the copy we are using now. So thank you, Simplify3D, for providing me with the beta copy of the software and for providing a copy for me to give away to all my subscribers. So thank you, Simplify3D. I really appreciate it. Well, that about wraps it up. We've pretty much covered what I think are the 7 coolest new features and upgrades in Simplify3D 4.0. I'll put out a couple more tutorials as the weeks go by, and I'll show you some more in-depth stuff on some of these cool new features. But for now, this wraps up the 7 coolest new features and upgrades in Simplify3D 4.0.